It's good to be with you again, and thank you for taking some of your time to spend with me. As you know, this course is called Social Entrepreneurship, a Grassroots Revolution. What I'd like to talk about today is a continuation from the last presentation. This is Key Steps in Project Development, Part 2. But as usual in these presentations, I'd like to fairly quickly mention that we do have a MOOC website, and just about any information about this course can be found at that address. Also, we have a Facebook page, and all you need to do is search Social Entrepreneurship Program. Also, as most of you know, there is an optional book. It's a book that I wrote called Social Entrepreneurship. This book is not necessary for you to do very well in this course. If you want a copy, the ordering information can be found both on the Facebook page and also at our MOOC website. I will continue discussing key steps in project development. We are working on a written document called the Project Development Report. This document provides details of our social entrepreneurship plans. This is an important document because it helps lay out the main project, the basic project ideas that we have. And once we have this document put together, it's probably the first time that we're able to fully see what our ideas represent. This is important to us partly because of what I just said, but also this document has the potential to be very useful a little bit later. For example, once we have completed our final draft of our document, which might take quite some time and be fairly detailed, that document can be useful in using a number of the parts of that for grant proposals. And also, it can be used to help other people understand what our project is about. For example, if we're trying to solicit donations to our project. So we're just about in the middle of me discussing the key steps in this report that we put together. The point I'm wanting to make here is that although especially the final draft of this takes a fair amount of time, it is a very important document to us. In my last presentation, I suggested that the full report is too much work for this short course. And I asked that for this course, you write an abbreviated version of this report. I asked that no more than 3 hours be devoted to this report for this course. After you've finished the course and after you have a good feel for all the points that I'm attempting to convey in this course, if it seems like the right time for you to get started on your your non-abbreviated report, I think that would be great. Be aware that a full report does take a fair amount of time. It oftentimes takes a fair amount of research on the internet and sometimes other sources, but because of its importance, whenever the time seems right to you, I do encourage you to get started on that full draft of that report. So let's take a look at the key steps for this report that I discussed in my last presentation. I mentioned it's important that we identify the people with whom we want to work and their location. We need to explain all of the unmet needs of those people. We need to explain the need on which we want to focus. We should explain agency work on the problem that we have selected or that you have selected. The point here is if there are existing agencies in the community where you want to work, what work are those agencies already doing on the problem that you have selected? Number 5, explain how your project plan is different from existing agency work. Number 6, identify strengths and weaknesses in your plan. And number 7, based on the weaknesses that we've identified, try to refine or improve our plan if possible. We are now ready for the 8th item in the project development report, and this is to construct one goal and 2 or 3 objectives for your project. So let's take a look at what a goal is, sometimes referred to as a goal statement. A goal reveals the broad outcome of the project. A goal is one brief statement. A goal is abstract, and the main meaning of that in this context is it is not in measurable form. A goal mentions the geographic location. A goal is agency-centered. It tells what the agency will try to accomplish. An example of a goal statement is as follows, and I'd like to use the teaching of English for elder refugees, that project idea that I've talked about previously. I'd like to use that as our topic example. And so a reasonable goal for this project to assist the refugees would be to strengthen refugee families that face challenges in their new culture in Metro Wisconsin. Note that first, this is one brief statement. Second, note that the goal statement starts with the word to. I encourage that as a part of the structure for our goal statements. And third, this is especially important, note that there is no reference to English being learned. The focus is on the core purpose, and that's related to what our goal should be. Our goal should be focusing on the core purpose. So let's take a look at this goal statement. We see in this statement no reference to the English classes that we know will be occurring. The key part of this goal statement, I believe, is right here, the heart of it, in terms of indicating what our intent is with this project. It is to strengthen refugee families. And the point I'm on right now is that even though we know that we're going to be teaching English, we're going to have a series of English classes, it's very significant that there is no mention of these English classes in our goal statement. So let's continue. A common mistake is that my students oftentimes experience is that they focus on the service to be delivered, in this case teaching English, rather than what I call the deeper purpose of the service being delivered. Here's an example of a weak goal statement: to teach English to elder refugees in Metro Wisconsin. When a student submits a goal statement like that, on the paper I write deeper purpose, ? The student would be correct that a part of the project does involve teaching English, but the teaching of English is not the purpose of the project. The teaching of English is a means. It's one of the steps that takes us to the deeper purpose, but the teaching of English is not the purpose. In most cases, only one goal will be needed per project. Now let's take a look at objectives. There are usually a few objectives for each project. 3 objectives are common. 5 is usually a maximum that we want per project. Objectives are single, brief statements that reflect the goal but provide more detail. Whereas the goal is broad and not stated in measurable form, objectives are very specific and indicate how measurement will occur. And another important point is that whereas the goal is agency-centered, objectives are client-centered. Early in my teaching career, I watched students struggle when they tried to write objectives. And it was probably about 30 years ago that I developed a format for writing objectives that has greatly helped my students. My model for writing objectives involves 3 key characteristics for all objectives. The first is time in history. The second is client-centered. And the third is to be sure to specify client behavior in measurable form. My suggestion for this class in terms of how you write your objectives for your social entrepreneurship project is to follow this approach, because I found that it's been very helpful to my students to include in all of our objectives include time in history, client-centered, and specify the client behavior in measurable form. So let's take a look at these. Time in history. This idea suggests that in all objectives, we should specify a time by which a client accomplishment must be completed. For example, by January 6th, 2000 something, specifying a year. Or another example, a separate example, we could say at the end of this course. Both of these phrases indicate a time by which something might be accomplished. The second part of all objectives is that the objective is client-centered. This refers to objectives focusing on client behaviors, not the behaviors of our organization. And an example would be elder refugees attending our English class will. That phrase is clearly focusing on our clients. The third dimension that I encourage you to have in all of your objectives is that the client behavior to which you refer in your objective is stated in measurable form. This idea suggests that the behaviors we expect from clients must be clearly measurable. An example would be score at least 70% on a comprehensive English quiz over material covered in class. So that's an example of something very measurable. It's indicating that a test is going to be administered and we are specifying a level of performance by the client. And we're specifying at least 70%. That's the kind of specificity that we need for measurability. The format I give my students is by blank, participating blank, will blank. And look how simple this is. That format is extremely simple. What I'm meaning there is, going down to that last statement on this slide, by the first blank, we should fill in with time in history goes here. Participating blank, here we would refer to our clients. And then will blank, and the client accomplishment in measurable form should be stated there. So it's a very simple format that has been very helpful to my students. Many of my students have difficulty with the structure of objectives when they don't use this format. So I invite you and I encourage you to use this format for objectives. Here's an example of an objective. At the end of the course, all elder refugees attending our English class will score at least 70% on a comprehensive English quiz over material covered in class. That objective is following that format. By blank, participating blank, will blank. I'd like to take a look at that in a manner that I'm able to write. Here's that objective, and that the first part, the time in history, is right here at the end of the course. And then the client-centered part is right here. All elder refugees attending our English class. There's the client-centered. And then will blank. That third blank should include indicating the client behavior in measurable form. So, indeed, what we have here is score at least 70% on a comprehensive English test over material covered in class. So, I've shared with you the format that I encourage, and this is one example for that format. At the end of the course, all elder refugees attending our English class will score at least 70% on a comprehensive English quiz over material covered in class. What complicates the situation somewhat is that there are different types of objectives. In this class, I would like to work with only two types of objectives. The type I've used as the example, I call a performance outcome objective. This type of objective specifies a level of performance in the form of an outcome by clients, such as scoring at a certain level on a test. The other type of objective that I will include in this course is what I call a process objective. This type of objective specifies a meaningful behavior by clients, but no level of performance in the form of an outcome. That may not be extremely clear to you right now, but I'll try to illustrate that in just a minute. The point is that the performance outcome objective has a dimension that the process objective does not have. What I mean by outcome is a consequence of participation in our project. So the performance outcome objective has this added dimension of specifying in client-centered terms a consequence of their participation in our project. That's the performance outcome objective. Here is an example of a different type of objective, a process objective. At the end of the first month of classes, all participating elder refugees will have attended at least 75% of all class meetings. At the end of the first month of classes, all participating elder refugees will have attended at least 75% of all class meetings. That is an example of the second type of objective, what I call a process objective. And I would like to take a quick look at this also in a format that I'm able to write on. So here we have that objective stated. One of the things I'd like to point out is I'd like to take a quick look at time in history, client-centered, and the client behavior in measurable form. So just to take a look at this as we did for that other objective, at the end of the first month of classes, okay, there we have our time in history. Next, I want to look and see if I have here reference to the clients, the client-centered aspect of the objective. And I say all participating elder refugees, so indeed that we do have client-centered, and then will blank. Here's where we want to refer to client behavior in measurable form. So in this example, I'm saying that the clients will have attended at least 75% of all class meetings. Now that has a context, and that is within the first month. So have attended 75% of all class meetings within that first month. So we have those three important parts of the objective, of all objectives: time in history, client-centered, and client behavior in measurable form. But I also want to indicate that this is a process objective, and it does not involve an outcome related to the clients that is associated with the influence that our project has had on the clients. What we're saying in the process objective is simply that some type of behavior is going to occur. In this case, they're attending at least 75% of all the class meetings that are held in the first month. That still might not be fully understandable to you, but I do have some other points that I'd like to make to try to clarify that. Notice that attendance at class meetings is a part of the process of the course with no outcome as a consequence of being present. Attending class simply refers to clients being present. Scoring 75% on a test refers to learning, or at least we hope that it's referring to learning. So the process objective simply states a client behavior such as attending class. A performance outcome objective states a level of performance by the clients. And so this is the distinction that I'm working with right now. Attending class, for example, is a worthy behavior for us to note in an objective. But we're not stating what the clients are going to be doing while they're in the class. They could be sleeping. They could be reading a book unrelated to the topic of the class. They could be texting their friends. To say that our clients are going to attend classes can have some meaning, but technically it's not. The process objective that talks only about client behavior without the consequence that our project has on the clients. Technically, the process objective is not having the full depth that we should have within our objective statements. Scoring at a certain level on a test, this has the bite, this has the meat, this has the significance, this has the reference to the consequence of our clients participating in our project. A performance outcome objective specifies some level of accomplishment as a result of participation in our project, whereas a process objective specifies meaningful client behavior without reference to any consequence of being present in our project. The statement on this slide, the statement that I just made, reading these 2 points, is simply repeating the point that I was talking about just a minute ago. The performance outcome objective is the more powerful of these 2 types of objectives, because the performance outcome objective specifies an aspect of client behavior that is a result of participation in our project. So the performance outcome objective is the more powerful of these 2 types of objectives. However, when a process objective is combined with a performance outcome objective, there is often value in having a process objective. They often work well together. So I'd like to review the points from this presentation. I've taken a look at the goal, which is a single statement that shares our broad purpose. And I would like to just take another quick look at this. The example I gave was to strengthen refugee families that face challenges from their new culture in Metro Wisconsin. So the goal statement is a single statement that shares our broad purpose. The objective statements, as we've been talking about, an objective is a single statement that shares specific, measurable client behaviors. All objectives have 3 common parts, as we've talked about. What are those three? Can you list those right now? Please pause and see how many of those three you can list. They're the 3 points I've mentioned so far in this presentation. I've mentioned them 2 or 3 times. Those three are time in history, client-centered, and measurable client outcome. So those are 3 parts of all objectives. And then another important point of what I've covered today is that there are 2 types of objectives. The performance outcome objective, and I'd like to put that up, take another look at that, just remind you of the example that I'm using in this session. At the end of the course, all elder refugees attending our English class will score at least 70% on a comprehensive English test over material covered in class. That's the performance outcome objective. The other type of objective that I've briefly mentioned today is the process objective. So just very quickly, as a reminder, here's the process objective that we worked with. At the end of the first month of classes, all participating elder refugees will have attended at least 75% of all class meetings. So those are the 2 types of objectives. Many small nonprofit staffs in the United States don't understand most of what I just shared with you in this presentation. Because they don't understand these points, they are oftentimes ineffective in documenting their effectiveness as an organization. They are ineffective in documenting that they are accomplishing what they are intending to accomplish. This issue to me is a really big issue. It's a substantial issue in nonprofit organization. Some staffs in the smaller nonprofits are not familiar with some of the points that I've been talking about. The importance of having client-centered objectives, the importance of having client behavior in measurable form. And as a result of some staffs in nonprofits not understanding these points, they do not use quality measures to determine the effectiveness of their nonprofit. They don't use quality measures to adequately determine the extent to which their organization is accomplishing what their organization is supposed to be accomplishing. And this point relates to one of the other steps in the report that I'm working with right now, that I'm going over the steps of that report. And so I will be addressing this issue of how nonprofits can more effectively collect data that can be used in more solidly documenting the good work that they are doing. So I'll stop for now, and I will be back for the next presentation. Thank you for sharing some of your time with me today.